the sacred warnings of Padre Pio.
There is a letter Padre Pio wrote to a young woman who had asked him how to prepare herself for Mass. Not what prayers to say, not which devotions to adopt. She asked him, specifically, how to enter a church. He answered in detail that would strike most modern Catholics as almost shockingly precise. He told her, enter in silence. Enter with great respect. Consider yourself unworthy to appear before the Lord's Majesty. Take holy water and make the sign of the cross carefully and devoutly. Genuflect before the Blessed Sacrament. I read that letter for the first time about 3 years ago, and my initial reaction was what I imagined most people's would be. I thought, this is a saint giving etiquette guidance. Then I thought about it more carefully, and I realized Padre Pio was not in the etiquette business. He was the man who could see angels in the room. He was the man who knew which penitents were coming to confession before they arrived, because he said their guardian angel had already come ahead of them. He was the man who wept at the altar during Mass in a way that witnesses unanimously described as a response to something he was seeing, not something he was feeling. He was not giving that young woman a list of courteous behaviors. He was giving her a field report about the room she was about to enter. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in Covington, Kentucky. I've been in serious study of Pater Chad Ripperger's work on spiritual warfare since a conference I attended in 2018. And what I want to tell you tonight is something I did not understand for most of those 35 years, something about the space inside a Catholic church that most of the people who enter it every Sunday have never been told. Not because it is obscure, because to say it clearly, to say it in the way it requires, involves implicating yourself in something that is genuinely uncomfortable to examine. Stay with me. This matters more than you may realize. Let me start where I now believe any serious conversation about the Mass has to start, with what is actually in the room. The Catholic Church teaches, not as opinion, not as pious tradition, not as spiritual metaphor, that in every tabernacle, in every Catholic church where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, the second person of the Trinity is physically present. Fully. Not symbolically, not spiritually in some attenuated sense. The real presence, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ under the species of bread. This is not a devotional extrapolation from Scripture. It is the formal defined doctrine of the Council of Trent. It is the substance of what a Catholic believes when they believe as the Church teaches. I taught that doctrine for 35 years. Now here is the question I did not, for most of those 35 years, ask with the seriousness it deserves. If the King of the universe is physically present in this building, what does that mean about the behavior of the people in the room? Padre Pio asked that question every time he walked through the doors of a church, and the precision of the answer he gave, enter in silence, with great respect. Consider yourself unworthy to appear before the Lord's Majesty, genuflect, becomes completely intelligible the moment you take the doctrine seriously rather than ceremonially. He was not describing a custom. He was describing the logical behavioral consequence of the fact. If the king is present, not metaphorically, not devotionally, but factually, by defined doctrine, then the room is a throne room, and the people in it are in the presence of someone who is currently watching everything they do. He can see them. He knows them. And this is the part of the picture Padre Pio added that I want to spend most of this video on. They are not the only ones in the room who can see. Now I need to give you the second element of what Padre Pio wrote about guardian angels, because this is where the instruction about how to enter a church connects to something most Catholics have never thought about. Padre Pio wrote to his spiritual children, and this is documented across multiple accounts in his epistolario, his collected letters, about the guardian angel with a specificity and an intimacy that makes it clear he was not speaking in poetic generalities. He wrote, "He is so finely mannered, so discreet. Respect him. Have continual fear lest you offend the purity of his gaze." Read that slowly. He is so finely mannered, so discreet. Have continual fear lest you offend the purity of his gaze. Padre Pio was describing a being of such fundamental holiness, that a soul should approach its own angel with careful reverence, because the angel has never sinned, has never looked at what is vile with anything but repugnance, and carries a purity of perception that the average human soul, if it thought about it honestly, would recognize as being of an entirely different order than its own. Now here is the connection that, when I first made it, stopped me for a long time. Padre Pio wrote that about the guardian angel in the general context of spiritual direction. He wrote about entering a church with silence, with reverence, with the deliberate awareness of the Lord's Majesty in the specific context of what happens inside that building. And he was a man who could see the angels in the room. So when he described entering a church as the act of approaching a king who is physically present, and when he described the guardian angel as a being so pure that we must fear offending the purity of his gaze, these two texts, read together, describe a single reality. When you walk into a church where the Blessed Sacrament is present, your guardian angel walks in with you. And your guardian angel is not there as an escort. He is there to worship. This is the thing I want you to hold very carefully, because this is the piece of the picture that most content about guardian angels leaves out entirely. And it is the piece that makes everything else Padre Pio observed about irreverence in church make complete and devastating sense. Dr. Chad Ripperger teaches, in his systematic work on angelic theology, and in his lectures on the Mass as a participation in the heavenly liturgy, that the function of the guardian angel at Mass is not primarily protective. The angel's primary function in the liturgical context is not to guard the body from harm, or even to carry the soul's prayers forward as a courier. The guardian angel's primary function during the Mass is to be a co-worshipper. He is not accompanying you the way a bodyguard accompanies a dignitary. He is beside you the way one worshipper stands beside another in the presence of the same king. And when the Mass reaches its summit, when the priest pronounces the words of consecration, when the bread and wine become the body and blood of the King who is already present in the tabernacle, the angel's gaze is on the altar. That being who has never sinned, who carries a purity of perception that Padre Pio himself described as something we must fear to offend, is standing at your shoulder, gazing at the Eucharist with a clarity of adoration that no human soul can match. And you. Now I need to ask you directly, where is your gaze in that moment? Stay with me here. Because what I'm about to describe is not a condemnation. It is a revelation of something that has been happening invisibly in the pew you have sat in, that most of us have never been given the framework to understand. I want to tell you what I discovered when I placed Ripperger's teaching about the angel as co-worshipper beside a data point that stopped me cold when I first encountered it. A survey conducted in 2019 by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate found that fewer than 40% of weekly Mass-attending Catholics report genuflecting before the Blessed Sacrament on entering the church. 40% of people who attend Mass every single week. A 2022 survey by the Knights of Columbus found that only 31% of self-identified practicing Catholics, people who go to church, who consider themselves Catholic, who would describe their faith as active, a firm operational belief in the real presence, in the literal, physical presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Not 31% of cultural Catholics, 31% of practicing ones. The majority of the people in the pews at any given Sunday Mass do not believe, in an operative, practical sense, that someone specific is watching them from the tabernacle. And yet, the angel does. The angel believes in the real presence with a certainty that has never been touched by doubt. The angel was present at the Incarnation. The angel participated, invisibly, in the events that made the Eucharist possible. The angel has been in the presence of God in a way that the human soul has not yet experienced. And when you sit in a pew beside your guardian angel, checking your phone during the homily, or glancing around the church to see who is seated nearby, or whispering to the person beside you while the priest prepares the altar, you are performing those acts in the presence of that being. He does not leave because you are distracted. He stays. He co-worships, as he is assigned to do. And Padre Pio, who could see the angels accompanying the faithful, testified through the anguish visible on his face during Mass through the weeping at the consecration that witnesses at San Giovanni Rotondo described as a response to something he was seeing, to what that looks like. I need to tell you about something that happened to me in the spring of 2009. I was still teaching at the time, in my second to last decade at the school. We had a student in the junior class named Christopher. Serious kid, daily communicant. He came to morning mass before school with his mother 3 times a week, a level of devotion that was genuinely unusual for a 17-year-old boy, and that I noticed and respected. After a school mass in May, the kind of brief all-school liturgy that runs 45 minutes because it has to, with a student choir and a visiting priest who doesn't know the school, Christopher stopped me in the corridor. He said, "Mr. Raymond, I have a question." He was earnest. He was not asking to challenge me or to be provocative. He genuinely wanted to understand. He said, "Does it actually matter to God whether I pay attention at Mass? I mean, the grace is there regardless, isn't it? The sacrament works because of what the Church does, not because of what I'm feeling. So does my interior state during the Mass actually change anything?" He was asking in his 17-year-old vocabulary about the doctrine of ex opere operato, and I gave him the correct answer. I said, "You're right that the validity of the sacrament does not depend on the interior disposition of the recipient. The Mass is efficacious by virtue of the act itself. You receive the Eucharist because of what the Church and the priest have done, not because you were sufficiently attentive." He looked relieved. That relief troubled me. Even at the time, I noticed that he seemed to receive my answer not as a clarification of doctrine, but as a permission structure, as if the theology of sacramental validity had just given him dispensation from interior engagement. I said nothing further. The bell rang. He went to class. 3 years later, I was reading Father Ripperger's work on the theology of the guardian angel in the context of the Mass, and I thought of Christopher, and I realized I had given him the correct answer about the sacrament. I had given him the completely wrong answer about the angel. The ex opere operato doctrine tells us something precise and true. The validity and efficacy of the sacrament is not dependent on the subjective state of the recipient. The Eucharist is what it is, regardless of whether Christopher was paying attention or thinking about baseball. But the ex opere operato doctrine says nothing at all about the guardian angel. The guardian angel is not bound by sacramental theology. The angel is not governed by the mechanics of how grace is transmitted through the ordained action of the priest. The angel is there as a co-worshipper, a being of radical holiness, standing at Christopher's shoulder, gazing at the altar with the full weight of a nature that has never been touched by sin. And Christopher was checking his phone. I don't know that Christopher was checking his phone. I don't know what he was doing during that Mass or any other, but he had, with genuine sincerity, asked whether his interior state mattered, and I had, with theological accuracy, told him it didn't, without once mentioning the being standing beside him who was watching what he was doing with his gaze at the moment the priest prepared the altar. I had given him the sacramental answer. I had missed the angelic one entirely, for 30 years. Now let me give you the Ripperger dimension of this with full precision, because it goes further than most people expect. Ripperger teaches that guardian angels are present at the Mass in a heightened and specific sense, not merely the background presence they maintain at all times, but an intensified engagement that corresponds to what is happening at the altar. His framework draws on the theology of Hebrews 1, verse 14. Angels are ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. And on Revelation 8, verses 3 and 4, an angel at the altar of God, with a golden censer, offers incense with the prayers of the saints before the throne. The Mass in Catholic theology is not a symbol of the sacrifice of Calvary. It is the same sacrifice made present again in time, the single offering of Christ made contemporaneous with every celebration, and the tradition holds that the same angels who were present at Calvary, who are present at the eternal heavenly liturgy, are present at every Mass. Your guardian angel is not attending a memorial service. He is participating in an ongoing eternal event that intersects, at this altar, with your particular moment in time. When you are in the pew during the consecration, your guardian angel is present at an event of absolute cosmic significance. He is gazing at the moment when the same sacrifice that tore the temple veil and opened the gates of heaven is made present again on this altar, in this building, at this moment. And this is where Ripperger introduces a dimension that I want to give you carefully, because it is one of the most theologically consequential things he teaches about irreverence. He describes the guardian angel's function in the Mass not only as co-worship, but as active presentation. The angel is presenting the soul's worship to God as an offering. He is, in a real sense, the one who takes what the human soul is doing, its attention, its intention, its interior acts of faith and adoration, and carries those acts upward into the heavenly liturgy. But here is the consequence Ripperger draws from this that no one has ever explained to me in 35 years of theological education. The soul's interior state at Mass, its attention, its reverence, its engagement, is the material the angel is presenting. The angel cannot present what is not there. If the soul is present in body but absent in will, if the mind is on the phone, or on the conversation happening 2 pews over, or on the mental list of everything that needs to happen this afternoon, then the offering the angel is attempting to present is incomplete. Not because the Eucharist is less real, not because the sacrament has failed, but because the act of worship the angel is there to carry forward is broken at the source. A broken offering, a vessel with a crack in it. The angel is still there, he is still worshipping, he is still gazing at the altar with a purity that Padre Pio himself said we must fear to offend. But the material he was assigned to present, your heart, your attention, your interior act of adoration at this singular moment in the Mass, is not what it could have been. Now I want to be very precise about what this means and what it does not mean, because this is not a sermon designed to produce guilt about ordinary human distraction. Distraction happens. The mind wanders. The child cries. Exhaustion is real. The homily occasionally fails to engage. None of that is what I am describing. I am describing the habitual posture, the pattern, the relationship to the church building that has settled into treating it as a gathering space rather than a throne room. The phones that go up during the homily as a matter of course, the early exits before the final blessing as a weekly routine, the whispered conversations during the preparation of the altar, the wandering gaze at the moment of consecration. Padre Pio distinguished sharply, and his witnesses are unanimous on this, between the accidental and the habitual. He was not the kind of confessor who condemned people for the ordinary infirmities of human attention, but he used a specific word for the habitual disrespect in the pews, not laziness, not carelessness, not inattention. He used the word contempt. Contempt is a volitional act. It is not an accident. It is not an oversight. It is the product of a formed habit of treating something with less reverence than it deserves, so settled, so automatic, that it no longer registers as a choice. The person who reaches for the phone during the consecration is not, in most cases, making a deliberate decision to disrespect the Eucharist. They are enacting a habit so deeply grooved that the decision has long since disappeared into the behavior. But the angel can see the habit. The angel was there the first time it happened, and the second, and the 50th. He has been present at every Mass this person has attended. He has been gazing at the altar with the full weight of his nature, while this soul has been building a habitual relationship to the throne room that Padre Pio would have named, clearly and without hesitation, as contempt for the real presence. And Ripperger teaches something here that I find extraordinarily sobering. He documents, in his work on deliverance, in his treatment of the conditions that establish what he calls legal rights, that habitual irreverence in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament is not merely a devotional shortcoming. It is not merely an opportunity for spiritual growth. It constitutes, in his framework, a pattern of contempt for the real presence that the demonic reads as an active claim of ownership over the space. The demon does not read carelessness. He reads contempt. And contempt for Ripperger's purposes is not about emotional intensity. It is about the volitional pattern of treating the presence as not present, of behaving over months and years of habitual Sunday practice as if the king in the tabernacle is not the most significant occupant of the building. That pattern, enacted in the presence of a guardian angel who is simultaneously co-worshipping at the same altar, does something specific in the spiritual architecture of the situation. The angel's function shifts. In Ripperger's framework, when habitual irreverence has established a pattern of de facto contempt for the real presence, the angel is drawn from co-worship into defense. He is no longer primarily present as the soul's companion in adoration. He is positioned, increasingly, to defend against what the established pattern has left open. That is not the function the guardian angel was assigned for the Mass. He was assigned to stand beside you at the altar, to co-worship, to present the material of your interior adoration to God in the heavenly liturgy, where this Mass is simultaneously occurring. The shift from co-worship to defense is not a consequence God imposes as punishment. It is the natural consequence of what the pattern has created. The angel loves the soul with a fidelity that never wavers. He does not leave. He does not stop serving. But when the pattern has constructed a spiritual condition that requires him to defend, he defends. And what he was there to offer together with the soul at the altar goes unpresented. That is what Padre Pio was weeping at during the consecration. Not the dramatic sinners who had wandered in off the street, the faithful, the ones who came every Sunday, the ones who considered themselves devoted Catholics, the ones who had no idea that the being standing beside them in the pew was making an incomplete offering week after week because the material he was assigned to present had been replaced by habit, by absence. Now I want to tell you what Padre Pio said about the consecration specifically. This is documented in the testimony of witnesses at San Giovanni Rotondo, both in Bernard Ruffin's Padre Pio, the true story, and in the account compiled by Cleonis Morcaldi, one of his closest spiritual daughters. Those who attended his masses, which in certain periods extended to 3 hours with the approval of his superiors, described a man who was clearly perceiving something invisible during the liturgy. Not visibly performing piety, perceiving something. At the consecration, witnesses describe a visible intensification. His weeping at this moment was not the quiet tears of devotion. It was the anguish of someone seeing what is actually happening at this altar and simultaneously seeing what the congregation is doing with the moment. Morcaldi records him saying, in a conversation about why the Mass affected him so visibly, that at the consecration, every soul in the church becomes the most observed it has been in its entire life. The King is most fully present. The angels are most intensely engaged. The heavenly and earthly liturgies intersect at their single most concentrated point, and the soul that looks away in that moment, not out of accidental distraction, but out of the settled habit of treating that moment as one among many moments in a long Sunday morning, performs that act of looking away in the presence of the most concentrated observation it will ever experience. The angel is at peak worship. The Eucharist is becoming on the altar. The King who is already in the tabernacle is present in a new and specific way on the altar. Every invisible participant in the heavenly liturgy is at full attention, and the habitual mind is checking the clock. Padre Pio once said to a penitent who confessed that he had been distracted at Mass for years, "You were not absent. You were there. The King saw you. Your angel saw you. The entire machinery of heaven was present and watching and waiting. The only person who was absent was you. Stay with me, because I want to give you the practical dimension of this, what to actually do with this. But first I need to establish one more thing that Ripperger teaches, because without it, the protocol I'm going to offer you makes no complete sense. He teaches that the guardian angel experiences something analogous to sorrow, not human grief, not the kind of sorrow that involves emotional pain in the way humans experience it, but something that, in the language of a being of perfect charity, corresponds to sorrow. The guardian angel is a creature of perfect charity. He loves the soul under his care with a love that does not waver, does not tire, does not become frustrated. He has been present since the soul's creation. He accompanied this soul into the church on every Sunday. This soul has attended Mass. He has been at this soul's shoulder at every consecration, and he has seen this soul build a habitual relationship to the most sacred moment in the Catholic liturgical calendar that amounts, over years of practice, to treating the throne room as a waiting room. Ripperger uses the word anguish for the angel's awareness of this pattern. Not anguish in the theatrical sense. anguish as the complete and accurate perception of the spiritual damage being done, and its eternal weight. The guardian angel does not experience relief when the Mass ends, and the soul exits without having engaged with the consecration. He carries the knowledge of what was missed and what was offered incomplete. He has been carrying it every Sunday. Now here is the question I want to place before you. When Padre Pio wrote to that young woman, "Enter in silence with great respect. Consider yourself unworthy to appear before the Lord's Majesty. Genuflect carefully," was he writing devotional guidance for the unusually pious? Or was he writing a field report? He could see the angels in the room. He knew which penitents were coming before they arrived, because their angel had already come ahead of them. He spent every Mass in a state of perception that his witnesses described as seeing what was invisible to everyone else present. He knew exactly what was in that building. He knew the King was present. He knew the angels were present. He knew that the gap between the doctrine Catholics affirm and the behavior they enact in the church building was not merely a pastoral problem. It was a spiritual one with spiritual consequences that most Catholics would never see because they lacked the perceptual equipment he had. So he wrote a letter. He gave precise instructions. Enter in silence, with great respect. Consider yourself unworthy to appear before the Lord's Majesty. He was not giving etiquette guidelines. He was describing the minimum behavioral consequence of what is actually in the room. Now let me give you something personal that I have not said publicly before. When I left teaching in 2020, I had a great deal of time that I had not anticipated. The structure of a working life disappears, and you are left with your own company in ways that can be either clarifying or quietly destabilizing. It was both for me. I had been attending daily Mass since Margaret's death 3 years earlier. Every morning. The same church, the same pew, the same time. I thought of this as faithfulness, and it was. But somewhere in the summer of 2021, I found myself reading Padre Pio's instructions for entering a church, the letter he wrote to that young woman, and I stayed with it for a very long time. And then I tried to remember the last time I had genuflected all the way down. I don't mean a partial dip of the knee, the quick, almost reflexive motion that functions as an acknowledgement of the Blessed Sacrament without ever actually reaching the floor. I mean a full, deliberate genuflection. Both knees, briefly, full bow, eyes on the tabernacle. I could not remember. I had been attending daily Mass, sometimes twice on Sundays, for 3 years. I had been in the presence of the real presence, by the calculation I found myself doing that summer, somewhere between 700 and 900 times, and I could not remember the last time I had genuflected all the way down. I do not tell you that as a confession of shocking irreverence. I was not treating the church building as a gymnasium. I was not arriving late and leaving early as a matter of routine. I was not checking my phone during the homily. I was attending Mass every day as an act of genuine devotion in the most grief-saturated period of my life. But I had developed, without ever deciding to, the comfortable habits of a man who had been in the presence of the King so frequently that the frequency had eroded the recognition of the fact. Padre Pio called this contempt. That word is hard to apply to yourself when you believe sincerely that you are being devout. But contempt is not about hostility. It is about the reduction of what is sacred to what is familiar. It is what happens to the doctrine of the real presence when it passes through enough Sundays to become background rather than fact. I had been co-present with my guardian angel at 700 Masses, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped behaving as if the King could see me when I walked through the door. The angel had been watching. I genuflected all the way down the next morning and held it for 3 counts and said out loud, the words that are actually true. I am in the presence of the Lord's Majesty, and I am unworthy to appear before him. It was not the most dramatic spiritual experience I have ever had. It felt honestly a little strange, like a formality I had not performed in years, suddenly requiring the muscles I had stopped using. But it was accurate, and there is a particular kind of peace that comes from doing the accurate thing in the presence of someone who has been watching you do the inaccurate thing and waiting with the patience of an eternal being for you to notice the distance. Now let me give you something specific and practical, because I want to give you what Padre Pio actually prescribed, not as a set of additional religious obligations to carry, but as the concrete behavioral acknowledgement of what is actually true about the building you enter every Sunday. I call it the Church Entry Protocol, and every element of it comes directly from Padre Pio's instructions to his spiritual daughters, and from what Ripperger teaches about the guardian angel's function in the Mass. There are 6 steps. The first step is to stop at the door. Before you enter the building, not once you have found your pew, not during the opening hymn, stop at the threshold. 1 full breath. This is not a long pause. This is the deliberate interruption of the momentum that carries people through doors without registering what they are entering. Say internally, or aloud if you are alone, the statement that is actually true. I am entering the house of the King. He is here. Not as a ritual phrase, as a factual recognition. The doctrine of the real presence is not a spiritual aspiration. It is a claim about objective reality. And acknowledging it at the threshold, before the momentum of the Sunday morning carries you past the point of recognition, is the minimum behavioral acknowledgement of what the Church teaches you are walking into. The second step is to take holy water slowly. Padre Pio insisted on care with the sign of the cross, not speed, not the reflexive motion of a hand that has made the gesture 10,000 times. Full deliberateness, naming each person of the Trinity as you make it. This is not about the water. It is about the act of the will that the water occasions. You are a person who has just acknowledged what building you have entered. You are marking yourself before the King. The third step is to genuflect all the way down, not a dip of the knee. Padre Pio described this specifically to multiple directees. A full genuflection, facing the tabernacle, down to the floor. If mobility prevents this, and for many of us age or injury makes a floor genuflection genuinely impossible, then a deep sustained bow. Hold it for 3 counts, let it be long enough to feel deliberate rather than reflexive. This is the act that most clearly enacts the recognition of what the King's Majesty deserves. It is the body performing what the doctrine claims is true. The fourth step is to ask your guardian angel to help you see. Before you sit down, standing in the aisle or at the pew before the Mass begins, say this specific short prayer. Angel of God, my guardian dear, help me see what you see during this Mass. Protect me from distraction. Tell me what is happening at this altar. This prayer is doing something precise. You are acknowledging the being who is standing beside you. You are acknowledging that he has a perceptual relationship to this liturgy that yours does not match. You are asking him, the co-worshipper assigned to stand at your shoulder, to lend you something of his orientation, his clarity, his fixity on the altar. He has been waiting for this acknowledgement, Padre Pio would tell you, for a long time. The fifth step is to stop everything at the consecration, not most things, everything. No adjusting the missal, no cough suppression, no leaning toward the person beside you, no looking at the time, no internal list-making about what comes after. Eyes on the altar. At this moment, in Ripperger's framework, your guardian angel is at the peak of the engagement he has been building toward since the Mass began. The heavenly and earthly liturgies are intersecting at their most concentrated point. Be where he is. This is not a performance of reverence for the other people in the pew. This is the act of actually being present at the moment when the King, already in the tabernacle, is made present again in a new and specific way on the altar. When Padre Pio wept at this moment, he was responding to what he was seeing. Let the fifth step be your attempt, however imperfect and partial, to honor what he saw. The sixth step is for those whose irreverence has become habitual enough that it needs to be addressed in confession. Confess it by name. Not, I haven't been as attentive at Mass as I should be. That is the vague confession of the vague category. Say, Father, I have been habitually disrespectful in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Specifically, I have habitually used my phone during Mass. I have developed the habit of leaving before the final blessing. I have whispered during the preparation of the altar. I have let my gaze wander at the consecration as a matter of routine. Name the specific behaviors. Because what Padre Pio understood about confession is what he understood about everything in the spiritual life. Precision is not severity. Precision is mercy doing its actual job. And then ask your confessor directly to include, in his prayer of absolution, a revocation of any legal right that may have been established through the pattern of habitual disrespect in the presence of the real presence. Ripperger documents that this request is theologically appropriate and that it matters. The pattern of treating the throne room as a waiting room over months and years creates something in the spiritual architecture of the situation that the sacrament of confession has the authority to address, but only if the specific pattern is named and the revocation is explicitly requested. Now I want to close with something I have been sitting with since I first placed Padre Pio's letter to that young woman beside everything else I have read about his relationship to the Mass. The instructions he gave were precise: silence, great respect, unworthiness before the Lord's Majesty, careful genuflection. He was not writing for people who had never been to Mass. He was writing for a Catholic woman who attended Mass regularly and had asked him how to do it better. His answer implies clearly that the ordinary way it was being done, by her, by most people, by the congregation filling the church around her on any given Sunday, was not fully accounting for what was in the room. He had seen the room from the inside. He had watched the angels accompanying the faithful into the church and taking their place at the altar. He had watched the souls those angels had come with settle into the pews and begin to do what people do when they are in a room they have been in many times before. He had watched the offering become incomplete, week after week, for 50 years, and he wept, not from despair. Padre Pio was not a man given to despair. He wept the way someone weeps when they can see what is possible and what is being missed simultaneously by the people they love. Because the angel is there, the king is present, the machinery of heaven is at full engagement, and the only question that remains, the question that does not end when this video ends, that follows you to the next Mass you attend, is whether the soul that arrives at the door of that building will stop, will take holy water slowly, will genuflect all the way down, will ask the angel standing beside it for help with seeing. Padre Pio's instructions were not etiquette. They were the minimum that the fact demands. The king is present, the angel is there, the consecration is coming. The question of what you do with that knowledge tomorrow morning is not one I can answer for you. It is not answered by watching this video. It is answered by what you do when you reach the door of the church. Before you sleep tonight, I want you to say this out loud. Lord, I have entered your house many times without stopping at the door. I have genuflected with the speed of someone acknowledging a habit rather than the King of the universe. I have been co-present with a guardian angel of total holiness, standing at my shoulder gazing at your altar, while I occupied myself with things I could have occupied myself with anywhere else. I am naming this tonight, not the general category of poor attendance or insufficient piety. This specific pattern, that I have treated your throne room as a waiting room, and I have done it in the presence of a being who has never sinned and who has been watching. Then, before you attend your next Mass, stop at the door, one full breath. The King is here, and ask your guardian angel to help you see what he sees. Padre Pio could see what was in the room. He gave us instructions that told us what to do with that knowledge, even if we cannot see what he saw. The letter to that young woman was not etiquette. It was the beginning of a tutorial in how to be genuinely present at the most important event a human being can attend on earth. She had asked him how to enter a church. He answered her as a man who had been seeing what was in the room for 50 years. Take this with you tomorrow morning. God bless you and stay vigilant.